Here are the top 5 techniques that you should learn to do properly on the guitar. Number 1 is vibrato, and you'd be interested to know that there's actually a lot of different ways to approach vibrato. Vibrato is what happens when you waver a note by pressing your finger down and then wiggling it. By pushing and pulling your finger at various strengths and speeds, you can get different sounds of vibrato. For example, wide and fast, or slow and subtle. What most people don't know is that there's alternate ways to play vibrato on the guitar. On classical instruments, subtle amounts of vibrato is actually gotten by pushing your finger to the left and right instead of up and down. And you can actually do this on the guitar. This will create a very subtle yet smooth vibrato sound. One final thing I like to teach about vibrato is that it mimics the voice a lot. And in vocal music, vibrato works to push the pitch both higher and lower than where it started. But on guitar, that's impossible because you can't go any lower than your starting fret without changing frets, right? Well, that's where you're wrong. If you start with a prebend, you can get that same vocal style of vibrato that goes above and below the pitch. A prebend is where you bend the string up before you strike the note. So by creating a starting point slightly higher than the actual fret, you can raise and lower the vibrato in a more dramatic fashion. My number 2 most important technique to learn properly is the hammer-on. Most people have heard of this before, but you can connect 2 or more notes on the guitar by playing the first one and then using your finger like a hammer to get the sound of the second one without plucking it again. If you watch closely, I can pick once but get 2 sounds out. Most people understand the concept of hammer-ons, but the best tip I can give you is to try to aim for the sweet spot right to the left of the actual fret. A good hammer-on requires consistency and a confident finger, so if you hesitate in your motion at all, it won't come out as clear as you'd like. It also requires a great deal more finger strength than beginners seem to think. Try it on the lower strings where it's a lot easier due to the thicker size of the string. If you've already learned hammer-ons, one way you can amp them up is by increasing the chain of notes. Imagine if you hammered on not just once, but twice or maybe even 3 times in a row. Starting on the open string, you could hammer on to the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th fret and get 4 notes for 1 pick. The third technique is, you guessed it, pull-offs, the opposite of hammer-ons. Pull-offs are where you get 2 notes from 1 pluck by playing the first note and then pulling it back to reveal the second note. My one and only tip for pull-offs is in the name. You actually have to pull off. The biggest thing I see is that people just lift their finger off and they can get a very faint sound, but if you want a stronger pull-off, which you do, you need to make sure that your finger is acting like a pick. It needs to actually pluck the string down. Again, if you already know how to do pull-offs, imagine if you could do a string of pull-offs in a row. Let's take the same thing but backward. You could use the 5th, 3rd, 2nd, and open frets, but only pluck the first one and get 4 notes with a string of pull-offs. My number 4 technique are slides. A classic slide is where you connect 2 frets by dragging your finger from one to the other. For example, you could take the 2nd fret and then connect it to the 5th fret by dragging your finger across the string. Make sure that you keep your pressure held down the whole time and you drag your finger. You don't lift and then try to replace it. The moment you let the pressure off, the slide dies. And keep in mind that sliding can go in either direction. You can take the 5th fret and drag it to the 2nd fret. There's 2 other types of slides I like to mention to new students. One is called a slide from nowhere, and another one is called a slide to nowhere. The basic idea is that if you don't set a starting point, but you do set an ending point, you can drag your finger across the string without any particular beginning to get the slide sound without the initial note. For example, if I slide to the 7th fret a few times, you can't actually tell me what the first note was. You can also do the same thing but backwards. Have a definite starting point but no ending point at all. Just let the pressure off of your finger before it reaches anywhere in particular. My 5th and final technique is very basic but has a lot of nuance, and that's guitar bends. Bends are a lot like vibrato but only going in one direction. You can play a note and then push it up to bend the pitch. What a lot of first-time players don't know is that you can actually use multiple fingers on one string. Especially on acoustic guitar, bends are very difficult, so you need all the help that you can get. Line 2 or even 3 fingers up on the same string and you can push up with a lot more strength. The more strength you have, the more you can control the pitch, which brings me to my second point about bends. A lot of people bend aimlessly, but if you want to sound like a professional, bends are actually trying to achieve a certain pitch above what they started with. That means, let's say you're on the 7th fret and you're trying to get to the 8th fret in terms of pitch, you can play one after the other and then try to achieve that with your bend. For example, this is called a half-step bend because the bend goes up exactly 1/2 step in pitch. You'd like to also be able to control a full-step bend. That would be like going from 7 to 9 in terms of pitch. Practicing accurate bends is the key to making them sound professional. You'll come across one of these 5 techniques in almost any song that you play, so make sure that you play them properly and consistently.